And 5, 4.
We're on.
Welcome, everybody. This is just a quick introduction. I'm just reflecting on those of us that have been around a while. These meetings have come a long way. They were pretty similar for 5 or 6 or 7 years, where you knew exactly what to expect when you came in the room. But we've been mixing it up. We have more presenters, a lot more information to present. That's why this is a quick introduction, because there's always a ton of information to present. I just want to thank my outstanding team. I don't think they need any introduction, because you have all been working with them closely or interacting with them, because we all do work together pretty closely. So again, we have presentations from National Weather Service, Corps of Engineers, Reclamation. I'll let everybody introduce themselves. But I did want to give the floor to Yvette to also thank our stakeholders and everybody involved. McKenna, head of our water management. Stand there.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. I'm Yvette McKenna with the Water Management Division here at Reclamation. This is our 2024 Rio Grande Annual Operating Plan. I've had the pleasure of working with this group for about 13 years now. I can't believe it. So we're going to take a look back first at 2023 and see how our models did to predict reservoir conditions and situation in the river, and then go forward with showing you what 2024 might look like. This information is based on the best inputs that we have from our federal cooperating agencies, and also that of all of our districts and utilities who are beneficiaries of our projects. So without that communication and coordination, we wouldn't be able to give you the best plan going forward for this year. So we really appreciate that collaboration, and I'll turn it over to Carolyn to introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
I think we've gotten most everything. The only thing maybe folks didn't mention, if you have to go to the bathroom, if you go out either of the doors, there are black signs on the walls directing you to the. Actually, why don't you all give a bit of introduction? But we're going to start off with Gus Goodbody, who's remote, and then, but maybe just start off with Andrew, Lucas, and Ray. You can introduce yourselves, and then after that we can do the lights. Andrew.
Oh, sorry. I thought Gus go first. All right. I'm Andrew Mangum. I'm the senior service hydrologist with the National Weather Service down here in Albuquerque, and I'll be talking about what we are expecting from the weather and what the Weather Service forecast is for water supply.
I'm Lucas Barrett. I'm with the Bureau of Reclamation under the Water Management Division, and I'm a civil engineer, and I do a lot of the modeling and database stuff, and I'll be talking about the AOP run and what we can expect in terms of flows throughout the Rio Grande.
My name is Ronaldo Del Grito. I'm the Rio Grande Basin Coordinator with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'll be talking about the Corps' role in last year's operations and this year's AOP.
Thanks to our partners, Weather Service, and also NRCS, who Gus works for, and then hand it off to Gus.
All right, thanks, Carolyn. My name is Gus Goodbody. I'm a water supply forecaster, hydrologist with the NRCS. I work for the National Water and Climate Center, which is a part of national headquarters. I've been forecasting in the Rio Grande since 2008, and this year I have been handing things off to Carl Wetlaufer, who's a new forecaster in our group, and working with him in that transition. I've been asked today to present a little bit about our new modeling system that we're starting to use this year, and I have about 10 slides. It shouldn't take very long, and I'd be happy to answer any questions people have. And I've also got some links for people who want to take a deeper dive on the guts of the new system. There's quite a bit of referee journal articles that summarize that model. Trying to get to the next slide here. Okay, so our new modeling system, generally we call the forecast environment Persephone, and it's really powered by a model that we call M4. There's been a lot of work done in the last 5 years making decisions about what an upgrade to a different modeling system should look like. A lot of this work was led by Sean Fleming, formerly of the NRCS. But really, the handoff and implementation has mostly been in my court. So this slide is really just saying there's a lot of different ways to get at these answers about for predicting water supply and seasonal volume in particular. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what the best choices for our agency were gonna be based on needs of our stakeholders, staffing, organization, et cetera. Different approaches take different amounts of staff time to accomplish, and ultimately we settled on the system that I'm going to present here today. So just looking at some key points of the new system, it's a pretty significant change from our old system in some ways, and then not so much in other ways. So the main point is that instead of just using a simple single principal component regression model for each of our forecast points, publication dates, target periods, we're now actually generating 6 independent forecasts using six different machine learning techniques. This gives us kind of added flexibility in addressing both linear and nonlinear problems. A lot of the forecasts that we deal with in the Rio Grande and Pecos are actually fairly linear in nature, but it really depends on the exact point we're talking about. And this new system really just gives us additional flexibility to deal with various basins of different complexity, basically. We're still using data dimensionality reduction, principal component analysis. So this is really no different than what we've done since the early 1990s, where we run our model inputs through this principal component analysis that separates out the different modes of variability that's represented in the data. And in fact, those are then used as input to the model. The new system also has 2 uncertainty estimation techniques. So we've always used a conventional Gaussian method where we assume normality and we can basically pull our exceedance probabilities off of that curve. What we're also using now is a Box-Cox transformation, which again performs better in nonlinear space. It also can perform very similarly to the conventional method when the data are normally distributed. And the final 2 bullets here, these are really big ones. So genetic algorithm is a new system that we're using within M4 that's used for feature selection. So generally as a forecaster, we're deciding what model inputs we want to use. I have slides coming up that will emphasize that most of those inputs are similar to what we've used for many years. So it's primarily SNOWTEL based data at the moment. It's primarily snowpack and water year precipitation data in particular. So when we're modeling a particular basin, we look at what sites are in or very close to that basin. We look at the length of the records that are associated with those stations and elements. And then we consider those the ones that meet minimum length of record, which is typically 20 plus years, would be the candidate variables that we would then feed into the genetic algorithm, which iterates through and finds different combinations to create an optimal model, and that optimal model is usually or always based on skill metrics. So R squared, root mean square error. So we're trying to minimize that root mean square error. We're trying to maximize the R squared. And this process is done individually for each of the 6 techniques. So it's not the same stations and elements may not be picked in each of the same models. I will say that the genetic algorithm is we're able to turn it on or off. So if we want to force a particular set of stations and elements for for all of the models, we do have that ability, but that's not generally how we've been running it. And then finally, the ensemble mean approach. So having 6 different forecasts sounds great, but at the end of the day, we're trying to produce a single forecast. And so there's a step at the end here that we need to take in order to combine those 6 different models together. And currently that approach is simply taking the mean of the different exceedance probabilities, which are produced for each of the 6 individual models, and just taking that simple model mean. It's been a really interesting experience for me, and I'll show a slide a little bit later that focus on this, but the fact is the ensemble mean in most cases, many cases, will beat the performance of any of the individual models themselves. And this is a lesson we've learned from the meteorological community, and something that we've been able to apply directly to the water supply forecasting. So as I mentioned, Persephone is really our new forecast environment, and we've been working to develop an interface that our forecasters can use to run the model, basically organize the inputs to the model, run the forecasts, evaluate the forecasts, and ultimately publish the forecasts. So this is our new water supply forecasting environment. It's a web app that we're developing in conjunction with partners at Colorado State University. It really helps us to organize and automate the modeling and forecasting processes. So one of the things that's been really important here, to go from basically managing a single model for a given forecast point and target period and date. If we're going to expand that out to 6 models, we had to have significant automation of some of these processes, because our staff has more or less remained static for a number of years. So this is a big undertaking, and it really was hinged on the idea that our new system would automate a lot of the processes that previously really were very somewhat tedious and manual steps. So anyway, the organizing of the models, involves selecting the candidate predictor variables, as I already mentioned, and we have tools that help us do that through spatial filters using maps, and we can also pick them directly from different lists. Once we've done that initially, those groups are generally saved for that basin. So when we go back the next time, want to rebuild a model or update the period of record, et cetera, that step becomes a lot easier than it was previously for us. We're also connecting to various data sources for the input files. So that largely is our internal NRCS database at this point, which we call the Air and Water Database, AWDB. This is where all of our SNOTEL data ends up every day, and where the historic records live as well. It's also where our streamflow data sets that are really what we focus the model training on live. We have a fairly complex streamflow adjustment system where we're pulling in the various components and naturalizing that data as much as we can. And then the system communicates with the M4 service. So this is actually a software as a service that's been set up. So the M4 code actually lives there. When we wish to train a model or forecast a model, we send the request to this service. That service does those computations for us and then returns the results. And again, Persephone organizes all of the inputs that go to that service, and then it catalogs and organizes all of the outputs from that service for us. And then we're still working on this part to some degree, but we have a number of display and visualization tools that help us review the calibrations and also review the forecasts in real time. Go to the next slide. And again, this system really empowers improved model management for us through automation. We are not just forecasting in the Rio Grande. Our agency, we have about 600 forecast points across the Western US. So some of our decision making is focused on that point, that we have a large domain with many points. So automating some of these processes really allows us to do a variety of things that can be really important to our stakeholders, including more frequent model recalibration. So, historically, rebuilding models we would do on sort of a 5 to 10 year cycle. We have the ability probably to increase that. And by doing that, we can include more recent years into the calibrations, which I think are important in this day and age. We also potentially have the option to increase the frequency for our forecast issue dates. Currently in the Rio Grande, we're issuing monthly forecasts. The new system has flexibility to really forecast for any date that we need. So we're moving towards, this year's really been focused on just mimicking what we've done in past recent years, but we are moving towards a system where we'll be updating closer to on a daily or weekly time step for these basins. And of course, automation allows our hydrologists more time for model interpretation and value-added analysis. So it's, the idea really is like, let's get the hydrologists out of this mechanical turning the crank mode and actually allow them to do the work where they can actually add value to the forecasts and explanation and analysis. I think M4 and Persephone for us really represents an incremental improvement in forecast model skill. And we've seen that in the testing. We've seen it in bringing the forecasts online this year as well. Of course, it'll take time to actually show that as far as, hey, we made the switch to this new system. Here's the new forecast. Is the skill improved or not? But all of our testing, and this is represented in the papers that we published too, do show an incremental improvement in forecast model skill just by moving to this new suite of 6 models and using an ensemble mean. And finally, this platform we've built, this is really just the starting point for us in terms of, it really serves as a platform for additional testing, both of new methods, so additional modeling techniques, other machine learning and statistical techniques, as well as testing new input variables. So some of our new models are going to benefit from additional input variables. And so we have a R&D plan and staff at NRCS, and we'll be testing additional inputs over time. We're really just entering into that phase. Just to show a few plots, some people like these, some people glaze over, but this is basically just a summary of 3 different skill metrics. And these are from a variety of points across the Rio Grande, Colorado, and Great Basin. So it's not only the Rio Grande, but really the message is very similar. So the left chart is an R squared, and basically in all these charts, the blue line is representing what our legacy historic published forecasts skill is, and then the orange line is representing what our new system has been capable of replicating. So in the case of R squared, you know, higher is better. So the general takeaway here is, in general, across the board, across that domain, for these April 1 forecasts, there was an improvement in R squared from the new system. Likewise, in the middle chart, which is root mean square error, where smaller is better in this case, the orange line is underneath the blue line, representing an improvement with the new system. And finally, the maximum error in the lower right, of course, smaller is better in this case too. That orange line is well below the blue line in pretty much every case. So these are not actually cherry-picked forecast points. These were just some of the initial testing we did. And like I said, this approach with the ensemble mean and the new 6 individual members has consistently outperformed our legacy system. Additional benefits, I'm just gonna point out again the power of the ensemble mean, and that's what the little chart on the right here is showing. It lists each of the individual techniques and what the R squared and RMSE for each of those individual techniques is, and then the top line where it says ensemble is the ensemble R squared and RMSE. And the takeaway here again is that in this case, the ensemble outperforms any of the individual models. And that's really the basis for our ensemble mean approach. Also, the multi-model approach really insulates against individual model vulnerabilities for any particular year. And oftentimes it's hard to detect which model is going to perform better on any given year. So this is, again, the reason we go with the ensemble mean. It addresses the concept of equifinality in the sense of we often don't know which model is going to be better on a given year. And when we look at the 30-year calibration period, we see a general skill improvement when using the ensemble value rather than any individual model. And finally, and this is certainly of interest for us and working with our partners at the River Forecast Centers at NOAA in particular, we can add additional methods to these ensembles, whether they're methods that we run ourselves or whether they're valid forecasts that we're getting from our partners. So this actually offers a way to combine the efforts of the different agencies to produce a single forecast potentially. Just a final couple slides I wanted to mention. So there's a lot of stability in this transition too. So yes, it's a new system for us, and there's been certainly a learning curve for our forecasters, but there's a lot of stability too compared to our old system. So our model predictor variables are generally unchanged from Viper, which was our previous forecast environment. And again, I mentioned this before, but we're basically using current snow water equivalent and water year precipitation from our SNOTEL sites, and in some case antecedent stream flow from the stream gauges in the basins. The legacy method for the NRCS, principal component regression, remains one of the 6 default techniques in M4. So it's not like we've discarded everything and starting from scratch. We're just adding to an already well-proven system. And then the way we report our forecasts and the way that our forecasts are meant to be interpreted is unchanged. We're reporting those different exceedance probabilities for our stakeholders to evaluate and assign their own risk matrices to, and that hasn't changed at all as far as how that's meant to be interpreted. And then just wanted to show these links. These are the 2 main papers that have been published about the new system. I encourage people who want more detail on it to go here. There's a link on this page as well. It takes us to our one of our pages that are one of our websites that has our professional publications, and you can access these and really get all the nitty-gritty on how the system itself works. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Gus. I appreciate the presentation. So does anybody have questions from the in-person audience? And if you're virtual, you can type in your questions and we'll have those read out loud if you have any questions for Gus.
Yeah, I've got a question. Hey, Gus, this looks pretty exciting. I'm definitely want to dive into those papers and get under the hood with this. But one of the things I've been kind of curious about is, have you guys ever experimented with using more than just the SWE from SNOTEL? Like, have you ever tried to pull in SNODAS into this and see if you see differences in forecast skill?
We haven't done it yet, Andrew, and that's when I sort of mentioned that we're starting to look at new input variables. That's exactly the kind of thing we're looking at. So there's a couple issues with that. One is availability of these particularly these spatial data sets, and also their length of record in some cases. Our system still requires, a relatively long length of record. But there are a lot of new spatial data sets coming online now, and there is a focus on extending those back in time in some cases where possible. And so for sure, those are the kind of data sets we're going to be evaluating, and not just for SWE. I mean, you could use it for precipitation, you could add soil moisture. I mean, really, the sky's the limit to some degree, and we do expect additional improvement once we start testing those new input variables.
Thanks.
Paige has a question.
Yes, Paige.
So apologies if I missed this, but just to clarify, is M4 being this year?
We've been running M4 in parallel with Viper this year. A lot of our forecasts have generally been informed by the new system. I will say that oftentimes there's been very good agreement between M4 and the legacy statistical method.
Thanks, Gus. If there's any questions that come up later for Gus, just feel free to put them in the chat. I think he's going to leave a little bit early, but we can get them to him and he can provide answers later on. So we're going to switch to Andrew. Can you share your screen?
No.
Real quick so we can put it out.
Oh,
All right, very good. All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about the water year 2023 review, and then really what we're going to focus on is the 2024 kind of monsoon and water supply outlook for us here. So we're going to start with a precipitation review, talk about the snowpack. We'll touch briefly on the drought conditions and soil conditions, and then we'll get into the climate outlook, and finally the water supply outlook, which might turn out to be just a little bit tedious. I've included all the points that we provide forecasts for. But you'll start to see the overall theme build up pretty quickly there. So looking at the precipitation, this is New Mexico. So when we look at absolute amounts of precipitation for an entire year even, there are a couple of hot spots where we had, remarkable amount of moisture come down, but a lot of areas it's pretty lean, it's in that just a few inches kind of time frame. Really though, if you look at it as a percent of normal precipitation for the last year, ultimately the state hasn't been doing that well. We came out of a really, really good water supply season last year, great snowpack, lots of moisture, and then we just didn't get a monsoon, basically. A really, really dry summer and fall. And that's reflected here in this percent of normal precipitation. A couple of areas of the state, maybe you could argue did okay, but by and large, everything was pretty dry. This is another way of looking at it, using more radar information, less ground truth information. A little bit hard to tell on this particular screen where New Mexico is, but it's a similar story. There are a couple of areas in the central part of the state to the east and the west that did okay for precipitation, but by and large, the state was pretty dry for the last year. If this is, compared to the previous year, if you take a look at percent of normal precipitation over the previous year, 2022 to 2023, way below that, right? We did not have a strong monsoon. We did not have a particularly strong winter, so we are running way behind last year. So getting into the snowfall analysis, this is a picture from NORISC, and this is using our SNODAS model, and this is a little bit different. I'm going to include the SNOTEL information because the graphics are really nice and are good for comparison to last year, but this is the information that the river forecast centers are using when they're putting together their own forecasts, right? And so this is total seasonal accumulation of snow. It was kind of a late start to the winter. We had a sort of a dry winter, but ultimately it turned around and did okay for us. But you see some numbers here, 12 to 24 inches, that kind of frame spread all over the state. So it was pretty widespread snow. Currently, if we look at SWE over the Rio Grande, we're seeing a lot of areas where we're in that 10 to 12, 12 to 14 kind of time frame. But then high up in the mountains, you see some of these darker colors, especially down here, and this will be more relevant later on when we talk to about the PECOS operating plan, where we have 20 to 30 inches of snow water equivalent modeled, running there in the model. Compared to last year, this is still less, right? I mean, the big drivers for the Rio Grande are going to be up here in southern Colorado, and it's substantially less water than we had last year. All right, so now if we take a look at the SNOTEL sites, we get in here, and some of these numbers are a little hard to see, I think, but a lot of our sub-basins here are just over normal or just under normal for the case of the kind of San Juan area, but we have 92% for the extreme headwaters of the Rio Grande, 92% of normal, 101% for the Rio Chama, a major tributary there. And then you have some numbers that are a little goofy, right? Like the Jemez with 774% of normal. And all that's really reflecting is that we have a pretty healthy snowpack up there that is hanging late into the year, when normally we don't have any snow left. So don't bite down too hard on that number. But let's kind of walk through this. So if you take a look at the headwaters of the Rio Grande, This dark line here that's running and stop, that's this year's accumulation. That green line is the average, and this is based off the SNOTEL sites. And then this kind of darker blue line that I'm showing here is from last year, right? So I kind of want to give everyone a sense of, this is what I get asked a lot, is how are we doing compared to last year? And we're quite a bit below in terms of SWE. You know, right now we're riding at around 16, 17 inches of SWE, according to the SNOTEL sites, as opposed to last year when we had more like 26, right? So, you know, 10 more inches of water up there. That theme continues as we move further down into Alamosa, similar kind of thing. We're, you know, 5 to 6 inches of SWE lower than what we peaked at last year. Once we get into the Culebra Trinchera section, pretty similar numbers as to last year. So it's not a complete across the board that we're lower, but in a lot of the basins we are. We go down to the Conejos, substantially lower than last year. But hanging in there right now, right around average. And that's what's important here, is that a lot of this stuff is kind of, even though we're lower than last year, we are coming in right now, right around average for a lot of the basins. The upper Rio Grande, this is down now in New Mexico. This is an area where we actually are doing quite well for snowpack. We're well above average. And this is going to be feeding a lot of those eastern tributaries of the Rio Grande. So you're in Budo Creek and your Rio Pueblo de Taos, you know, those rivers are going to be running pretty well and delivering a fair amount of water. We get a little further down, here's the Rio Chama Basin. You know, it's right around normal, but it's substantially lower than we had last year. So there's going to be quite a bit less water to be dealing with going through some of those dams, which actually might be less of a headache than it was last year. Now we take a look at the drought conditions. You know, in 2023, we had substantially lower drought conditions, really, really pretty calm by this time of the year for this state. This year we're suffering because we had a really long, dry year, so it's no big surprise. But I mean, especially the Pecos River itself is running through some of the worst drought-stricken areas of the state that we still have. The main Rio Grande itself kind of rolls through areas that vary anywhere from D0, which is just abnormally dry, all the way up to areas of extreme drought running through it. We take a look at soil conditions. This is for 2023. You know, for the previous water year, we had really good soil conditions. We had a change of soil conditions where the overall soil conditions got a lot wetter, and they were just absolutely maxing out their percentiles for the 2 meter depth soil moisture percentile over a lot of the state. And so that was what we had last year. This year is a bit of a different ballgame, and these graphics are kind of interesting. We have some pretty good percentiles for soil moisture in the northwestern and very northern part of the state, and in the very far western part of the state. But what's interesting to look at is if you look at the 1 year difference in the soil moisture, this really reflects this sort of odd phenomenon we had where we had incredibly wet soils last April, and then really, really huge amount of drying throughout the state. Now it sort of seems contradictory because now we still have fairly wet soils, but that really is down to the last couple of months of snow accumulation. That's really what it is. You know, we had a very, very dry summer, a very, very dry fall, mostly dry winter until sort of mid-February when things turned around and we started getting lots and lots of moisture, and that's been helping this. Now, our climate outlook has been, since January, has been pointing to a pretty abrupt transition from El Nino conditions to La Nina conditions. And if anything, that message has gotten stronger. It looks like in the June, July, August timeframe, we're going to be switching over and be actively in La Nina conditions out in the ocean. What does that mean for us, for the monsoon and for the climate outlook? It sort of depends on who you ask. If you look at the Climate Prediction Center, let's take a look and march through their stuff. You know, right now they're saying for most April, which we're pretty much through at this point. Unfortunately, these graphics got updated this morning and I didn't have time to put these in. But they weren't seeing any strong signals for above normal or below normal temperature or precipitation for much of the state. As it turned out, we were largely above normal for temperatures and below normal for precipitation for April throughout big chunks of the state. Moving forward, though, to the April, May, June timeframe, they're really biting down on this developing La Nina picture where, you know, typically for La Nina, it's drier and hotter. That's mostly a winter phenomenon, less of a summer phenomenon, but CPC is still kind of biting down on that. So they're leaning now as we move forward into the year to above normal temperatures, below normal precipitation. And that only gets stronger as you go further in. May, June, July, you even have a higher percentage, a higher likelihood of being above normal and a higher likelihood of being below normal for precipitation. Finally, June, July, August, same exact story. They're just saying dry, hot, it's almost as if they're saying that we're not really going to have a monsoon at all. Now, the people in my office, and because of that, the drought outlook is saying that basically where we have drought, we're going to keep drought. Not a lot of new development, which is a little bit interesting, but we're going to basically keep the drought that we have. Now, there's some other viewpoints to be had here. The people who are really looking at this hard in my office are climate specialists. They're pointing out that this abrupt transition can wreak havoc with the jet stream a little bit and can tend to result in a situation where there are less dry air intrusions in the state. So last year, one of the things that killed us is we just had this high pressure ridge that parked itself right over the state of New Mexico and kept all the moisture from coming in. It just said it was like shields up around the state. It just sent all the rain around us, right? Because of the abrupt transition does some interesting things with the jet stream. We think that that's not going to happen so much this year. And if we look back at 2010 and 2016 or 2015, where we also had these very abrupt transitions from an El Nino to a La Nina, we actually ended up with monsoons that were maybe just a little bit below average and even above average in some parts of the state. And so that's the thinking that we're really biting down on in our office. Our best guess is not, we're not going to have a monsoon. Our best guess is we're going to have a dry June and July. And then maybe near the end of July, this could all turn around and we could get quite a bit of water coming in storms through the state through late July, through August, and through early September, enough to almost bring it back up to near normal. Now, I want to stress there's an enormous amount of uncertainty with monsoon forecasting, right? So we're still trying to get better at that, but this is our best guess. So it's a little bit of a mixed picture. We'll see how it comes out. Now we're going to move into the water supply forecast, and this is where it's going to get a little bit repetitive for everyone, so bear with me. I wanted to take a second here to walk through this graphic so everyone knows what they're looking at, because it's kind of a complicated graphic, right? You've got this green line up here. This is for the Rio Grande wagon wheel gap. This is the very northernmost forecast point on the Rio, as a lot of you know. You've got your average and median volumes, right? And that's what we're forecasting here is a volume of water that will be delivered from the beginning of April through the end of September, or through the beginning of, or the end of September, sorry. And, so you've got your average and your median volumes. You've got your max and your min volumes at the top and the bottom. And then you've got this whole shaded area here. Now, the bottom of that shaded area represents the West Gulf River Forecast Center's 90% exceedance. The top of that shaded area is the 10% exceedance. The blue line that's running through it is our 50% forecast. And that's sort of our official forecast, right? These bars that you're seeing here, these are the NRCS forecasts. And there are going to be most of these points where you'll see both the bars and the graph, but there are a couple areas where we forecast that they don't, and vice versa. All right, so that's just a layout of everything. As you can see here, the water supply forecast is below normal, right? We're talking kind of 75% of what's average for this point. Same thing as we move south, right? We're looking at, this is about 91% of average, so not too bad, but we're starting to see here at the South Fork of the Rio Grande and South Fork, Colorado. Again, it's been sort of below normal. You'll notice that a lot of these, it's kind of been marching up, and that's all due to this late winter precipitation that we've had as we move through the year. And I always tell people, don't bite down too hard on the January and February forecasts, right? Especially with the way winters have been going in the Southwest, where we've been increasingly seeing kind of a dry start to the winter and a wet finish. It's really, there's a lot to be said about don't get too gloomy when you're looking at January and February. Wait for April. All right, so April's pretty good. It's not great, but it's not a miserable outlook. As we move down to Del Norte, same kind of thing, pretty close to average at this point. Decent agreement with the NRCS about what the 50% should be. Moving down here now to Sawache Creek, we've got right around average. NRCS is a little bit more optimistic than we are at this point, and there are various reasons why these differ. But our forecast is that this is going to be just about average running through there. All right, this is Alamosa above the Terrace Reservoir, just a little bit below average again. Moving down to Conejos, right around average, right? Not a miserable picture, and that's what I'm kind of getting at here. By and large, this isn't terrible news, right? But it's not great. If we can get near average, though, in some years, that's a win, honestly, for the way things have gone for the last 15 years. All right, Culebra Creek, right around average. Here we go. The Red River below the fish hatchery is running below average this year, about 77%. All right, the Rio Chama below El Vado, this is definitely below average this year. See how that ends up panning out. Rio Hondo near Valdez, again below average. This is another area where we're sort of in disagreement with the NRCS, and they're a bit more optimistic about having it be a closer to average flow through there. Rio Pueblo de Taos, this is one we're a little bit above average. This is where we're starting to get in some of those areas that are being affected by what we are thinking is very, very high snowpack up in the mountains, substantially higher than what the snow tells are saying. This is an area that, this is La Madeira, the Rio Ojo Caliente. This is not one that the NRCS does. This one's kind of right around average. It's got a pretty average snowpack up there. Here we go. This is in Budo Creek. This is not, unfortunately, not a massive delivery of water, but it's still a reasonable creek that feeds into the Rio Grande. But this is one where we're pretty confident we're going to have an above average year at this point. And this is, again, because it's coming down out of mountains with something like 30 inches of sweet in our models. All right, Rio Chama near Chimita, a little bit below average. Santa Cruz River, another one that's being fed by a large amount of SWE up in the mountains, so it's above average there. And that's where I'm going to stop right there. There are a couple points further downstream that we do forecast for that show us as maybe 150% of average. Those are the points that we really want to caution, like San Marcel and the Rio Grande and Ottawa. Those are points where we aren't taking into account all the diversions and all of the withdrawals and stuff like that. We're just modeling what we should be natural flow. And it's a notoriously difficult area for us to be really accurate about. So I didn't even want to bother with that. We're way above what the NRCS is forecasting, and the NRCS forecasts at those points, I will just admit, are substantially better. So that's all I've got, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Curious, the model, does that take into consideration the dam there, or is that like without the dam?
It's without the dam, and that's one of the challenges with the West Gulf forecast is that the water supply forecast sort of pretends that the dams aren't there, essentially. You know, this is all just what we would model as natural flow. Yep.
And I just wanted to, Gus typed in that it's important to mention that the River Forecast Center forecast is for future only volume once inside the official target period. So after April 1 in Colorado or after March 1st in New York.
Yep, that's absolutely right. Thanks for pointing that out, Gus.
I actually have a quick question.
Mhm.
This actually might be for Gus, but your slide actually kind of reminded me. So that Red River snowtail gauge I noticed was significantly below most of the other gauges along the Sangre de Cristos. And I'm guessing that's why it's been, I know NWS and NRCS has forecasted fairly well below average for that specific point. And I was wondering, is that, either of you have any idea what might be going on with that snowtail gauge specifically?
I can't speak to the snowtail. For the West Gulf to be issuing a below normal forecast for that point has, you know, the snowtail is part of the equation for that, but
Okay.
really it's snowdas that they're using for that. So we're modeling lower amounts of snow up there as well. I think it could just be a weather phenomenon in terms of the patterns of where the snow fell. Some areas were winners and some were losers. I don't know much about that specific snowtail site, if it's particularly sheltered or anything like that. But
The averages are based on 1991, 2021. Is that what it is?
that's correct. Yeah,
Okay. Does that change each year? Do you
it changes every 10 years. Yeah.
you ever do comparison back to more historic averages?
Well, what do you mean exactly?
Went back to 1970 or something. 50.
Substantially, right? So, you know, those normals are steadily marching down as we move every 10 years, right? So like the 1980 through 2010 normal was significantly higher than the 1991 to 2020 normal for snowpack. So if you keep that, if you roll that window down, you know, you're definitely seeing drier conditions throughout the Southwest. That is undeniably the direction we are headed. Lower snowpacks, drier conditions, more extreme events that are further apart is kind of where we're headed in terms of our weather. I think 30 years, you know, unfortunately, statistically, it's hard to go much below 30 years and keep it robust. But if you go ahead and ignore that and just look at 15 years, you're seeing that, you know, that difference is even more extreme, right? Like the trajectory is really towards drier climate.
I have a question online. It says, I think the PDO is in phase with ENSO. Is that part of your more optimistic outlook for the 2024 monsoon?
Yeah, I didn't want to wade into all the oscillations, partially because it's not necessarily an area that I am super strong at. But yes, that was discussed by the climate specialists in the office as being one of the reasons that we are a little bit more optimistic about what's going to happen with the monsoon.
If you think of a question later, you can ask it after the annual operations plan. So we'll switch to that presentation by Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers.
There we go. All right, hello, my name is Lucas Barrett, and I'll be presenting the Rio Grande Annual Operating Plan here with Ray. So I just wanted to, for people that may be unfamiliar with the basin, just kind of go through some of the major, I guess, players, users that really affect what's going on in the river. And it's also to give people idea in case I do say one of the abbreviations or something like that, you understand what I'm talking about. So, I mean, just kind of going down through some of these, I mean, there's Bureau of Reclamation, the Corps, IBWC, the NRCS, which is the National Resource Conservation Service. We got City of Santa Fe. We have Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, and Elephant Butte Irrigation District, and El Paso County Water Improvement District, or EP1. So when we're actually going through this, just to give you an idea, so the model that we use, it has multiple different rules that it follows and different policies. So in the model, it includes these policies, including the treaty, the 1906 convention between the U.S. and Mexico, the Rio Grande Compact between the three states and how it divvies up the water, Article 7 restrictions. So basically, the model will make sure that in post-1929 reservoirs, such as El Vado, when usable storage in Elephant Butte and Caballo is less than 400,000 acre feet, it can't, or El Vado or any of those post-1929 reservoirs cannot store native water. And then there's, we also have different project authorizations for each of the dams that I'll actually get into in a slide here in a second. And then the operating agreement between, for the Rio Grande project for EBID, EP1, and Reclamation. Also, another thing that I just kind of want to give folks, and especially those who are unfamiliar with the basin, there's also different types of water within the basin itself. So there's the native or natural Rio Grande water, which is basically the water that comes within the Rio Grande basin. A lot of the snow tail, everything is coming off of the mountains within the basin itself. Then there's the San Juan Chama water, which is the water that's actually imported through the San Juan Chama project, basically through a series of multiple canals and diversions that we get from the Colorado River. There's another pot of water is the supplemental water, which is water that Reclamation leases from the San Juan Chama project to augment flows in support of the Rio Grande Silver Minnow. And then there's also P&P water, which is water for the prior and paramount lands of the 6 Middle Rio Grande Pueblos. And also just kind of throwing this out there for anyone who may not know kind of hydrology terms, CFS, cubic feet per second, basically flow rate, what you'll see on these hydrographs over time. There's also acre feet, which is basically showing the volume of water. That's how we measure volume of water within our reservoirs. It basically shows the amount of water needed to cover 1 acre to depth of 1 foot. Then there's the hydrograph itself, which is just the flow rate that I mentioned over time. There's the runoff forecast, which for the purpose of this, we are using the NRCS volumetric forecast, which generally goes from March through July, although the Colorado points actually go from April through September. And then the other thing to mention is SNOTEL, which we'll go through a couple of the SNOTEL sites, kind of overview of what Andrew already gave. And those are just location that are automated data collection sites that the NRCS uses that basically calculates snowpack, precipitation, temperature, and other climate conditions. So just to kind of give you an idea of the area and the specific sites that we're going to be looking at. Let me actually laser point here. Just starting kind of up north, we'll be looking at some of the, like I said, the San Juan Chama project. So we have the 3 diversions, and then those 3 diversions go into the Azotea Tunnel, which comes out right at Heron Dam. The Heron Dam is actually offshoot of the Chama River, so it's not along that. So Heron Dam pretty much stores only San Juan Chama water coming from the Azotea Tunnel. El Vado Dam is actually the first dam that's along the Chama River, and that's right downstream of Heron. Going downstream of both, we'll look at Abiquiu Dam, and then going to kind of on the main stem, we have Embudo, the Embudo gauge. We'll look at flows there, and Odawi gauge, as well as look at Cochiti Dam going further down the river. And then this is kind of just keep going down. So here's Cochiti Dam here. We'll look at Central Gauge, and then here's MRGCD. So you can see kind of their irrigation area along the river here. And then we'll look at Sanacasia Gauge before getting down to Elephant Butte Reservoir down here, and then kind of going similar, going back up here. So we have Elephant Butte Reservoir here. Then straight downstream of that, we'll have Caballo Reservoir. So we'll look at results from there. And then we have basically EVID and then EP1 downstream. So what drives this process in our model? So the main process that drives this is basically the volumetric forecast that we get from the NRCS. Which, as Gus kind of mentioned, is based off of the snowpack, soil moisture, and other antecedent conditions, depending on what location is being forecast. The other thing to mention is that because it's a volumetric forecast, we have to turn this volume of water that we get from the NRCS into daily flows. So to do that, we basically select a similar year based off of either the volume and or expected runoff shape and timing. So our model allows us to kind of select what we kind of think that would be like. We can also further alter that hydrograph as needed, whether it's kind of ratioing up or down or moving the peak in terms of timing. As example, move the hydrograph earlier or later based off of if we're expecting kind of a warmer spring or a cooler spring. So we can kind of move that peak of the hydrograph. And then, as mentioned before, the model takes into account all of the reservoir operations based off of the nature, basically the headwater flows that we're putting into the model based off of the NRCS forecast, as well as all the policies that are involved. So that's basically what's running all of the reservoirs outflows. And then kind of just going a bit more into it in terms of the NRCS forecast, how it kind of works in the model. As mentioned, we basically get this NRCS forecast or the NWS and from March through July. Sometimes it's a little bit different timing in months, but it's basically a sum volume in between that time. And then we or the model, either one, can select basically a hydrograph year based off of what we think the hydrograph may look like. And then we can manipulate the hydrograph as necessary, and then it will automatically adjust up or down the hydrograph based off of the NRCS volume. So we can select any hydrograph and it will basically match that March through July period so that the flows during that period will match what the NRCS forecast is showing. Just to go into some quick information over for the reservoirs that we'll be looking at. So we have Heron Reservoir, which is a reclamation reservoir, and that primarily stores the San Juan Chama water supply and can also be used for recreation. There's also the El Vado Reservoir, which is also a reclamation, and that can store both Rio Grande and San Juan Chama water supply, and is also can be used for recreation.
So Abiquiu Dam is a core dam. Right now, it's a San Juan Chama water supply only. We have a Rio Grande supply with an asterisk beside it because there are conditions that have to be met before we're able to store Rio Grande system water. One of them being, main thing is our water control manual update, which is in its final stage of approval and signature. So we'll have that very soon. And then there's some other conditions that water supply users are going to have to meet before being able to store Rio Grande system water. So because there is a water supply storage of water there, there's incidental recreation that is allowed, but the primary authorizations are flood control and sediment control along with that San Juan Chama water supply at Abiquiu. Cochiti is also a core dam. It only has San Juan Chama water supply or water there. It's not necessarily a supply dam. Water supply dam has water, San Juan Chama water. Has authorizations for recreation and flood control and sediment control. Amos Canyon Dam is a core dam, and it's only there for authorizations are flood control and sediment control.
And then the final two reservoirs in the before getting to Texas are Elephant Butte and Caballo Reservoir. Both of those are reclamation. For Elephant Butte, it can hold Rio Grande and San Juan Chama water supply and can be used for recreation and flood control. And for Caballo, it's only Rio Grande water supply. So basically, just all the water is coming out there is for EBID and EP1, and then it can also be used for recreation, flood control, and sediment control. So quickly, just going to start out going in 2023 and review, kind of see how our models did basically for last year. Before I get into it, I just kind of want to show this slide because you'll be seeing this graph a lot. So just to kind of explain it. So this is just an example of Heron storage. So for this, you'll see there's a black line, which will be for observed data. There's going to be kind of this teal blue line, and this is going to be for the most likely scenario, or the NRCS forecast 50% that we're going to be looking at. And then we'll have basically exceedance bands. So we'll have the 30 to 70% exceedance kind of within this tan area, and then the 10 and 90% exceedance between the purple area. And essentially, when you think of exceedance, just think of like for example, this bottom between this bottom tan and purple, that's basically the 70% exceedance line right there. Basically, that means that there's a 70% chance that the flows will be above that point or that line, and a 30% chance that it will be below that. So looking at 2023, so in terms of Heron inflow, you can kind of see that we did pretty good at nailing the general pattern of what we expected to come in. So the bold black line matches up fairly well with what we expect, although it wasn't necessarily always within our exceedance. It still generally was within the trend of what we were expecting. In terms of Heron outflow, the one main thing that we originally forecasted in our last AOP that is different with this one, or is different than what actually happened, I should say, is that we had issues essentially with debris at El Vado that restricted releases. And because of that, our operations that we were planning on doing for rafting releases kind of gotten a little bit messed up Initially, when we were trying to release enough out of Elvado to make those rafting releases, we couldn't quite get as high as we wanted to. After some debris removal with our field facilities, they went out there and did a good job of trying to get all that debris and everything out. We were able to start releasing, but to basically so that we were trying to avoid the problem of debris clogging out the outlet works. We ended up just kind of doing a straight flat release of around 450-ish CFS out of Heron. I think that was closer to 500 because out of Elvado, if we include the native inflow that's coming into Elvado, but that's why here in Heron, you'll see that it's basically becomes a flat release here in terms of observed data that's being released instead of all these bunch up and down. And then in terms of Heron storage, we actually, in terms of the forecast, we actually surpassed even the 10% forecast in terms of how much water we got in. So we managed to get in a pretty good deal, getting up to about 160,000, almost 70,000 acre feet of storage at its peak in Heron before, yeah. In terms of Elvado inflow, it's going to be, you can see that, again, we pretty much nailed it in terms of getting pretty close to the peak, what we kind of expected. Our model initially went up a little bit higher, but there was a cool down period initially during April before the peak ended up happening. But otherwise, it pretty much followed the trend fairly well. And again, here you can kind of see the 500 CFS that we were releasing out of Elvado to try and avoid that debris clogging the outlets in there instead of a bunch of up and downs that we were originally planning for the weekend rafting releases. For Elvado outflow, essentially we were just trying to, because it's under construction, we were basically just at this point, we're just trying to release everything that's coming in, release it through the outlet works. In terms of Elvado storage, you can see not only because of the large inflow that we got into Elvado, but also partially because of the debris clogging the outlet works, we did end up storing up to about 10,000 acre feet. And then we were trying to release that as fast as we could to get back to around 2,000 acre feet, which is where we're supposed to be for construction purposes.
So Abiquiu Dam pretty much receives all of Elvado's outflows and some local inflow, but it's particularly driven by Elvado outflow. It pretty much represents what the releases out of Elvado are, and we peaked about 4,500 CFS in inflow, and then you'll see that 500 CFS inflow between July and September. Our outflow AOP estimated that we were going to be at our max 1,800 non-damaging releases, 1,800 CFS non-damaging releases for just under 3 months. But that didn't happen. There were some events that occurred. One in the Middle Rio Grande that had Cochiti reduce their flows, or the releases. And at Chimita Gauge, the control there is about 3,000 CFS, and we were near that for some time. So that kept the Abiquiu releases around 1,400 to 1,500 CFS for most of the runoff season. And then coming into July 1st, there was a requirement. There are requirements that have us lock in spring runoff as flood storage or flood storage, and we have to hold that until the end of the irrigation season to make releases. And so you'll see that from late August into September or the end of August, we pretty much followed the normal releases, and then you'll see that in September we start to make big releases, and then along with other types of water towards the end of November or beginning of November to the mid-November, we made some considerable releases, and after that we were limited on how much we could release because of conduit inspection and construction. So we placed bulkheads in the intake structure. There's a slide gate on it that allowed for about 55 CFS to continue through the winter season. There were some shutdown days, but they were limited to about 10 days. The Abiquiu storage increased to about 232,000 acre feet. Currently, with the new water control manual, the elevation, the allowable storage elevation is going to be 6,230 feet, which translates into about 230,000 acre feet. So what we see here as the peak is pretty much what we're capable of storing for water supply. So because we had limited releases for those downstream conditions, we slowly released storage until July 1st, and then July 1st we locked in that storage. So we didn't move much. We didn't release much out of storage at Abiquiu until beginning of September, where we increased releases on the outflow plot. Then we brought it back down to about 90,000 acre feet, and it was 80,000 acre feet, and we ended the year with about 85,000 acre feet. Cochiti inflow typically follows Cochiti outflow. Inflow peaked around about 7,000 CFS during spring runoff, and then which is probably about 10% of the exceedance of the AOP. We were able to, well, everything else followed along with what the regulation out of Abiquiu was. The main part of the Rio Grande dropped off in terms of inflow about this time. So most of the regulation that most of the inflow is regulated and primarily by Abiquiu. You'll see that 500 CFS contribute to the base flow of the Rio Grande. You'll see that inflow about 1,200 CFS for most of the from September to into November. And then the outflow, we were limited again. There was an event in Rio Grande required Cochiti to reduce, and so we maintained about 5,000 to 5,500 for most of the runoff period. We managed to. You'll see here that the storage increased to about 120,000 acre feet, but we managed to evacuate all that, and that's why we have a reduction in release here in late June going into July, and then we just managed regular normal operations through November, and then this water that came in right here increased this storage. This is the flood storage that we released out of Abiquiu, and that ended on October 31st. We held it until November 16th, and then we started releasing all that water along with other types of water. That's why we went up to about 2,000 CFS here at the end of the year, and then we went back down to normal operations.
In terms of Elephant Butte, for the most part, our model nailed pretty much what we were expecting it to be. I think the biggest difference was at the very end, just because of how much water came in. There was a lot more, basically from Cochiti, all that release of flood water at the very end of the year. You can see that what actually happened definitely differed from what we were originally expecting. In terms of Elephant Butte outflow, again, we got pretty close in terms of what we were expecting versus what actually happened. It does look like the districts did go down a little bit faster, specifically by mid-August, but we pretty much nailed the ending period and everything else. And again, Elephant Butte storage is kind of a similar thing. Our most likely scenario pretty much got fairly close to what we were expecting. In terms of Caballo inflow, similar to Caballo Elephant Butte outflow, again, we did a fairly good job at trying to modeling that. In terms of Caballo outflow, we were able to successfully model figuring or kind of working with our partners EBID and EP1 down in below Caballo, kind of got an idea of what they were expecting for that or for the season, so we were able to match fairly well with what actually happened. In terms of Caballo storage, this did end up differing a little bit more. So in our model run, we were expecting them to have a little bit higher. Basically, we weren't expecting the generators to be able to keep up as well as they did coming there for Elephant Butte. So we were able to push more water downstream to Caballo storage, basically keeping that up closer to the 5,000 acre feet. And then the other thing that kind of differed was at the very end of the season, we ended up going down to about 5,000 acre feet instead of our planned 15,000 acre feet. And that was due to maintenance that we had to get in that we didn't know earlier in the year. So kind of going over current snow conditions, I'm just going to go real fast since Andrew covered most of this. Just a quick map of showing the snow-tailed locations so you can kind of see them all around the state within the Rio Chama and the upper Rio Grande, along the Sangre de Cristos and over in the Jemez. So I'm just going to, it's basically, I just pulled all 5 graphs that kind of separate into the five main regions up there. So in terms of the Rio Grande headwaters, so this is basically up in Colorado. Again, Andrew kind of already went over this. We're pretty close to what happened in terms of, or we're pretty close to the median, but definitely not as high as we were last year. And looking at kind of the more recent graphs, so this I pulled off on April 12th. So it does seem like looking today, it's just been dropping really fast. So basically what we can see in the river now with all those flows going right up. In terms of, here's for the upper San Juan, so basically where we get our water from the San Juan Chama project. Again, we're falling really close to median for the most part. I think now we are below median, kind of dropping pretty fast with these high temperatures we've been having. But looking at 2023, basically this purple line, we're just nowhere near how good of last year was. Similar thing for Rio Chama, black line showing the observed. Currently, it looks like we're headed down with all flows are coming up right around the median, slightly above. Still not as good as last year, but hopefully at least a decent year. Looking along the Sangre de Cristos, here it matches a little bit closer actually to last year. Maybe didn't quite get up as high as the peak. But we're currently kind of following the pattern that we saw last year. So it does seem like we got a decent snowpack along the Sangre de Cristos. So hopefully that will be somewhat. We'll get a pretty good runoff from that. And then we have the Jemez, which again is actually above median. Although not quite as good as what we had last year. But you can see kind of what Andrew was saying currently. I think when I took this, it was 455% of median. But again, if you actually, that's just because it's being drawn out longer. It hasn't really melted off. Well, now it's really starting to melt off, but that's basically why. It's not necessarily that the volume is that huge. It's more that it's just holding on later into the year. Now just kind of going to go into the actual annual operating plan after a few more slides. So just to give you some important model assumptions that we kind of made when we're going into this. So we felt like the 2000 hydrograph shape was kind of similar to what we were expecting to get this year. If you'll see here in the projections coming up, it'll just be a fairly large kind of one-time peak. For El Vado Reservoir, again, we're going to have the restrictions due to the construction. So it's going to be at 6785 plus or minus 1.5 feet, which is around 2,000 acre feet total, except during the April 1st through May 15th period. And then because we're at such a low head, basically that low elevation, it's harder for us to push out water through the outlet works. So generally, we're considering our max release out of El Vado right now around 3,500 CFS. And then in terms of Abiquiu, because of the construction at El Vado, we have an agreement with the Corps to store the P&P water in Abiquiu. Currently, as of this model, we're kind of expecting a storage of P&P of 17,500 acre feet, although that could still change. And then that will basically, any unused P&P water will be released at the end of the year. Then in terms of Caballo and Rio Grande operations, so for EP1 in Mexico, they have already came on and started. You can see we're releasing right now out of Caballo as of March 8th, and we're expecting EBID to come on probably around June 1st. In terms of how long they'll last, we're expecting EBID to probably go out for about 2-ish months, maybe 2.5 months to late July, early August. And EP1 in Mexico, we're expecting the end date then to shut off probably late September, maybe even early October, depending on how much water we get in. In terms of a similar year, just to kind of give you an idea of that project, basically, the irrigation supply in 2020 was kind of similar to what we're expecting there. Currently, the Mexico supply is at 62%, but it will increase. And then the total release that we're expecting from Caballo is going to be around between 500 to 660,000 acre feet. Which is 65% to 85% of the normal project release, with the most likely of 560,000 acre feet, which I think is around like 72% of normal project release for that. Just to look at the forecast. So this is just looking at the 50% NRCS forecast and comparing last year to this year. So you can see in all of the cases, the forecast is lower this year than it was last year. Again, last year was an amazing snowpack year, one of the best we've had in quite a while. But this year still is shaping up to be an all right year. Most of the sites are, I would say, slightly below average. Some of them are including like Jemez River is above average, and some of the Sangre de Cristo sites also that go into the model are above average as well. So I would expect for most of the NRCS forecast sites that we use in the model, it's right. I would say it's slightly below average, but right around there. And I should say below median. Sorry, it's technically median. All right, so going into the actual results. So for Heron Dam, this is kind of what we're expecting. So for the following graphs, again, I kind of already explained them, but in terms of, you'll mostly see inflow in the top left, outflow top right, and then storage, and then possibly another graph here, depending on the reservoir. So for Heron inflow, we're kind of we're expecting to basically kind of runoff start right away, or basically right now, which we're currently seeing. Expecting that to stay around 600 CFS throughout April, May, June. Maybe peaking, hitting the capacity of Azotea Tunnel for a short period as well, before kind of shutting off. In terms of Heron outflow, so the one significant thing that I do want to point out is, again, you will not, compared to last year's AOP where we were doing the weekend rafting releases, this year, because we have a little bit extra water that we can send down downstream, and also because we also are concerned about that debris issue, we're going to attempt to basically release a flat rate of around 400. Well, in the model, it's about 450 CFS. I think it's going to be 500 CFS at Elvado. Again, it's a little bit more at Elvado because of the natural inflow coming in through Elvado, but we're planning on keeping basically a steady rafting release of around 500 CFS. Through basically starting toward the end of the runoff period and going into, we're hoping, late August, early September timeframe. In terms of storage, we're expecting and getting a peak probably most likely around 130,000 acre feet, but then ending the year probably lower than where we began. In terms of the San Juan Chama allocation for our contractors, the 50% most likely, and everything above kind of shows that we will get a full allocation. The 70 and 90% don't quite get to a full allocation, but it seemed, I'd say in the most likely scenario, we will get a full allocation for the contractors. Going downstream to Elvado Dam, again, just a slide recap. We're still under kind of construction scenario within Elvado. So during that period, again, excuse me, we're restricted to about 2,000 acre feet. That being said, as I mentioned before, April 1st through May 15th, we are allowed to store a little bit higher depending on, as I mentioned, Elvado, because it's at such a low head, Elvado can't release as much as it usually can. So we are allowed to go above that 2,000 acre feet up to around 6,800 feet or 9,405 acre feet between April 1st to May 15th. And then rafting releases, as I've kind of already mentioned, in the Heron side will be managed through Heron and bypass through Elvado to basically meet that 500 CFS out of Elvado. So Elvado inflow, and I'm going to say outflow. So again, we're managing it so that hopefully that basically inflow is going to equal outflow for the most part. You'll see the big peak coming in, maybe reaching about 2,500 CFS at its maximum in mid-May before coming down. And then starting in June, you'll see this basically flat 500 CFS coming into Elvado and also being released from Elvado. That's basically us, again, regulating Heron so that we can meet 500 CFS rafting release out of there till at least around late August, or early September is what we're kind of aiming for at the moment. In terms of Elvado storage, we're basically, again, inflow equals outflow. So we're just going to try and keep that around that 2,000 acre foot target due to the construction.
Going down to Abiquiu Dam. So as I stated before, Abiquiu Dam typically follows Elvado releases. So you'll see the inflow into Abiquiu about 2,500 CFS. There are local inflows, but it usually doesn't really impact the as much. I mean, there's the regulation typically is what we see. This year outflow, we're looking at about 1,800 CFS max non-damaging releases for about just over 2 weeks in the early May to late May. And then release is dropping off. You'll see the 500 CFS, I'm jumping around here, I'm sorry. It's the 500 CFS that coming in from Elvado and then dropping off here, and inflows going down to about, I'm going to say between 50 and 100 CFS throughout the rest of the year. the releases out of Abiquiu are typically based on demand. And we'll see increase here and then the drop off here. And this was because emergency water running out in about, I'll say mid-July. And then we'll follow lower demands here going into mid-August. And is this that allocation again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, MRGCD will get, the model is showing that the MRGCD will get its final allocation in mid-August and then start releasing some of that water.
And then finishing out by the end of August. And then releases out of Abiquiu will be about 100 to 200 CFS until mid-November, where we're going to release unused water, including PMP, or prior power amount, until from mid-November until is that mid-December? I think it's mid-December, and then just regular winter releases. I mentioned earlier last year we had construction in the conduit that limited releases out of Abiquiu to about 55 CFS. This year there were plans for construction for some vent pipes, but that may be delayed. I got to verify that. So if that's the case, then this is possibly really what's going to happen. Storage at Abiquiu, we started out about 80,000 acre feet. We're probably going to peak about 120,000 and not the 230,000, amazing 230,000 last year. And pretty much maintain that until we release that prior power amount and other types of water here at the end of the year, bringing the storage step back down to about 95,000 acre feet. So on the main stem Rio Grande at Embudo, during runoff, we're looking to probably about maybe 1,750, maybe 1,800 CFS peak in the most probable, and then dropping off back down to base flows of about 250 CFS. And this, I don't necessarily know what this is right here, because on the main stem, typically the Colorado would probably end irrigation and bypass all inflow. Bypassing all irrigation, then that's probably what that base flow is there. And going down to Cochiti Dam, right now we're slowly starting to see that runoff. We're probably about 1,600 CFS right now. In the model here, we're probably going to peak about 3,000 CFS, 3,500 maybe, and then come back down and go according to what the regulation out of Abiquiu is. We saw earlier in Budo start to drop off, and then we'll see what this here where MRGCD runs out of water and their release, or the release out of Abiquiu from their demand lowers there, and then follows basically the Embudo until we see these little peaks here from MRGCD release. And then base flow again, and then the final release out of Abiquiu of that prior power amount and other types of water. And then finally going back to base release of about 500 CFS. So Cochiti outflow is going to typically follow Cochiti inflow, because we try to maintain a rec pool of about of 1,200 surface acres, which falls around here about 43,000, 44,000 acre feet. This red line is MRGC demand. It doesn't always get followed, but we try to manage to it, or it try to supply as much water to follow it. But this year it doesn't look like we're gonna meet a lot of it after July. then you'll see the release out of Cochiti or bypass of that PMP and then the Texas water at the end of the year. At Jemez Canyon Dam, we think it's going to probably peak around 350 CFS. I'm thinking maybe 400 at the most, and then dropping back off and going back to base flows below 50 CFS for the rest of the year. At central gauge, will typically follow the Cochiti releases and peak about 2,500 CFS and drop off and just follow exactly what we're releasing out of Cochiti, and losses and stuff will have an effect, and releases probably drop down below 100 CFS or about 100 CFS between here in the late irrigation season. And then irrigation stops and that base flow increases, and then you'll see the PMP go through the gauge here at the end of the year.
And one thing to also mention is that when we do the modeling, we always assume very low to minimal monsoon activity. So we don't, again, monsoon is basically impossible to predict. So we don't really know what it will be like. Just like in previous years, it sometimes gets a little bit dicey starting in September, but we'll definitely work with our partners to keep this as connected as possible. So going down to Bosque Farms, so this kind of give you an idea of what to look at as Letter Reach. We're going to get, we're looking at getting probably a peak flow of around 2,500 CFS before basically dropping down from there. Drying could start based off of what we're seeing, maybe mid-July timeframe, and last through October, depending on monsoon activity. Going downstream a little bit more to Santa Casia Reach, basically see peak flows a little bit less at around 2,000 CFS before dropping down mid-June or early June timeframe, and then maybe starting late June, sometime in July, we could start seeing drying down there. Again, also depending on what ends up happening for the monsoon before coming back up in October. Just wanted to put the slide in here to kind of show usable storage. So usable storage, again, is pretty much Elephant Butte plus Caballo minus some San Juan Chamo and credit water. But this basically tells us when we are in and out of Article 7, so when we can store up in reservoirs like El Vado. So for this, you can see that we're projected to probably go back into Article 7 restrictions starting probably mid-June timeframe. And then most likely we will not be out of Article 7 by the end of the year. Going to what we're expecting for Elephant Butte. So in terms of Elephant Butte inflow, you can see that we're expecting kind of a release of around 2,000 CFS before dropping down, and then getting fairly close to like very minimal inflow into Elephant Butte by the end of the irrigation season. In terms of Elephant Butte outflow, again, this kind of follows what I mentioned in the assumptions. So EP1 and EP1 in Mexico, I've already started in March. We ended up using or turning on Elephant Butte a little bit beforehand to kind of preload Caballo, and then we're expecting. Currently, we're expecting releases to probably stay around, I think, 700, 800 CFS up until when EBID comes back on, or not comes back on, but comes on. And then once they come on, we'll probably expect releases of above 2,000 CFS at Elephant Butte until EBID probably turns off. And then we'll probably go down to closer to between 500 to 1,000 CFS. In terms of Elephant Butte storage, we can expect we have a peak storage of around 500,000 acre feet, and that already happened in February. We probably won't go above that. Very unlikely that we will go above that. With this inflow that's coming into Elephant Butte, we might get a little bit of a peak up here in maybe late June, or late May, early June, before going back down and probably ending the irrigation season, maybe around 80,000 acre feet, 80 to 100, and then kind of going back up after EBID and EP1 in Mexico shut off. Looking at Caballo, for Caballo inflow, pretty much looks like Elephant Butte outflow. And then in terms of Caballo outflow, it's basically a similar story. Again, March 8th, EP1 and Mexico turned on. From there, they they usually go up just to kind of get the channel wet, and then they'll go back down from there. We expect them to probably stay in that 500 to 1,000 CFS range up until EBID comes on, and go up to around 2,000 CFS, and then from there kind of drop down to the end of irrigation season, which we're expecting again late September, early October. In terms of Caballo storage, we're going to try and keep Caballo around 50,000 acre feet before dropping it down to about 15,000 acre feet is our target for the end of irrigation season, like it was the last few years. And that is pretty much it in terms of what we're expecting along the Rio Grande. I did want to kind of post this we have a new dashboard now that is public, that anyone can go on and basically see all these results, actually see more than, see some, actually get like the numbers and stuff like that from these results. So all you need to do is go to our main webpage, which is here, and then click on this. The dashboard link right here for the Rio Grande annual operating plan. Currently, it has, currently the March AOP is still up, but hopefully the April AOP should be up here momentarily. I would say sometime today. And with that, any questions or comments?
Thanks. I'll start with an online question and then we'll move it to the room. So this is for Ray from the Corps, or anyone from the Corps. Will the updated operations manual for ABIQ require the consent of the Rio Grande Compact Commission prior to storage of native water?
That most likely will be part of the permit storage or storage permit. Most times it'll outline conditions from the compact that, like Emergency has conditions for their storage. Like in Article 7, they can't store if New Mexico has debit, correct?
So you mean following the current compact rules,
So
as opposed to like individualized permissions?
Yeah, so the water right will allow for a permit. The permit will describe those conditions. And then contracts between parties with the acknowledgement or the signature of the Corps of that acknowledgement for that contract. So several things that have to fall into play for that.
In the room? Yes.
Yeah, I can have it too for you. For the vent pipe replacement work that is, you said it might be delayed. If it's not, how's that going to affect outflows?
So right now there are 3 days of allocated 8-hour shutdown days, meaning they're only given 8 hours to reduce flows out of ABIQ to 0 CFS, and then the 16 hours of the rest of that day flows are going to be set to allow for a 24-hour average. But just those 8-hour shutdown days. And then outside of that, there are limitations because once they take the vent pipes out, the flow of water typically pulls air through those vents. The vents go all the way up to the surface, right? And so that flow of water has so much pressure that it pulls air in, and it usually comes from outside. But if once they take those vent pipes off, it limits the amount of water that we release to probably about 100 to 150 CFS. And then the rest, the 18 hours that they're not, or the 16 hours that they're not in there, will be able to make up for that 24-hour average. That's the plan, but it's still in the planning stage.
You know, what that 24-hour average.
Wow. Well, we'd like to limit it because we have conditions for downstream increases, right? So we can't go more than 6 inches per hour in increase. So if we go, say, from 100 to like 800 CFS, that might be a 3-step increase. So that puts it at a 3-hour increase. So we have this 8-hour period. They come in at 8 o'clock, and we have to start reduction at 5, 6, 7, and the last one at 8. And then if they finish at 5, and at 5, 6, 7. So we'd like to limit that time, the timing on that.
So for your flood operations, do you anticipate any this year? And what is your flow threshold for deciding flood operations?
1,500 CFS is our threshold. Once we exceed 1,500 CFS, we typically go into flood operations and only native and flood releases.
Projecting for flood operations out of that was the model.
Like 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, 2 to 3 weeks.
Line question. If Mexico goes to full allocation of 60,000 acre feet, will this change reservoir operations and or duration of the release season?
I would say in general, the model is already kind of expecting that and being built in terms of expecting Mexico to already have an increased allocation, including a full allocation. So I would say that it's still going to be within late September, early October timeframe, most likely.
But he's just hungry. Okay, so thanks for staying over. We really appreciate your interest and attendance in our public meetings. If you have a question later on, you are definitely encouraged to reach out to Reclamation, the Corps, the Weather Service. We're all public servants available for questions and helping people understand how the river is operated. Anything else for closing?
For everybody that took the time to come in person, it's good to see faces again.
It goes, it'll be at 2 o'clock.
Yes, 2 p.m. is the takeoff. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.